G'day everyone, welcome back to the channel. I've brought along, as usual, once a week, you get privileged. I bring in Big Paolo. How are you doing, Paolo?
I'm very well, Pommy. You know, it's always a privilege to do this with you, my friend, and I'm looking forward to getting stuck into the nitty gritty of this topic that has reared its head over the last maybe month or so.
Yeah, definitely. We're becoming like the Mythbusters crew of Carlton.
It's PPI. PPI doesn't stop, Pommy. It's just it's a going concern.
we should be called the Blue Busters. But we're talking about this big thing. What's eating Patrick Cripps? And obviously the rumour, like you say, his numbers are down, evidently, and he's not playing well. And there's some speculations. Is he injured? Is he out of form? What is it? We're going to really try and answer that question today to get a bit of an understanding. And the R word is going to come up a lot. Roll today, I think.
Yeah, I love rolls. Fresh rolls, ciabatta rolls, French rolls. They're great.
You can tell the difference in our culture as well, because when you said rolls, I was thinking sausage.
Yeah, I think that's what endears people to us at the moment. It's the mix of pom and itai mixed with a bit of Aussie. But no, I'm looking forward to this because I think Voss kind of alluded to this a couple of weeks ago in a press conference where he sort of made mention that Cripper was sort of on track for 3,500 Brownlow votes early in the year, but the last couple of weeks he's had to play maybe a little bit of a different role and more of a selfless role, to quote Vossi himself. But it doesn't mean that he hasn't been performing for the team, which we will touch on.
Mate, Spawn, well, let's look at Mr. Cripps. This is his season this year. So for those watching at home, anything blue is considered elite, which in the AFL, that's the top 10% of the league who play his position. Red is below average and green is very good. And yellow is exactly where you'd expect to see 50% of the people playing his position.
Yeah, I mean, look, you look at the numbers and nothing. I mean, there's nothing really that I don't think there's anything alarming in those numbers. He's still playing the role that we need him to play. Is that tough on baller inside mid, feeding the ball out to the better users in the midfield too. And I think conversely as well, I think with the blokes coming in around him like Chera and Hewitt and the development of Matt Kennedy. I think it's seen his game flourish. And I think we saw the best of him early in the year when he was able to also push forward and really hit the scoreboard hard as well, which is something that, I think the best midfielders are able to do, especially someone of his height, being able to push forward, take marks. And he'd improved his set shots early in the year. I know it's probably waned away a little bit as the year's gone on. He missed that one against Geelong. That is, he nailed one of those against West Coast 2 weeks ago. But, I think he's played a lot more of a selfless role, and that's a word that's come up in the last sort of month, which is, I think that's what you need from a captain. We know he's a star, Pommy, and we know he's the man that's going to try to win games for us and be the man at the top of all the, statistical sheets and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, you've also got to facilitate the teammates around you, which has been big with the mantra that Voss has brought about Princes Park.
Mate, spot on. And I think the big thing for Cripps is if you spoke to Patrick Cripps, I'd imagine that he would sacrifice a Brownlow to win a flag. Do you know what I mean? If you said to him, Cripper, you're never going to win a Brownlow, but I can give you 2 flags as a captain, I think he'd bite your arm off tomorrow for it. And he'd be like, screw the Brownlow vote. I don't care.
Yeah, he'd take it in a heartbeat, of course. He's turned into the ultimate team player. Not that I think he was that or wasn't that on purpose in the last couple of years, but I think by design and by what we had in the past, he kind of had to be the person that took everything, took the game by the scruff of the neck and had to win it for us. Whereas now we're a lot more, we think we're a lot more system-based, and he's just another cog that's part of the system, and he's one of those cogs that obviously we have to rely on, not too heavily, but, we do rely on him a fair bit to win the ball from stoppage as well. But he knows that, and that's his role, and that's what he has to do for the rest of the season and his career going forward as well.
Well, yeah, and I think if you look at these numbers as well here, this actually has him 8th at the moment, ranked this year. as a midfielder. So
right.
pretty impressive. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
still, if this is a shit year that people are making out it is, it's still pretty impressive if you're 8th.
Yeah, exactly. Of course. And look, I mean, you look at those like centre clearance and stoppage clearance numbers there. Like, you know, he's averaging elite in that category, 3.3 and 4 a game. Like, it's, I mean, that hasn't waned away at all. You know, and I think that's I mean, that's part of the game that we have based our team on, and that's part of the game that he bases his own game on as well too. So, you know, I think the way that Voss has sort of centered the game plan as well, like the nucleus of it, where it all starts from, is what his strength is. So, you know, at the contest, winning the ball at the coalface, and then, as we mentioned last week when we did our preview for Geelong, which obviously it didn't end up panning out that way, but his ability to draw in 2 midfielders to tackle him, take the contact, and then give the ball out to the free player. We've seen that on multiple occasions this year, and that's been a clear reason as to why we've been able to win games based on centre clearance and gain field territory based on centre clearance.
Mate, spot on. And like the big thing for Cripps is when we talk about role, is when we go back and we look at Cripps pre, and I suspect this is something that no one talks about, but round 6, when PeterV horrifically went down, you see a noticeable change in his output. And I suspect that is because TDK's weak area has been shepherding and blocking in them coalface scenarios. Cripps 11% down in his forward time. We're starting to see him really enact and spend his time on the ball around his feet, doubling up with Kennedy. And if we look here, these are the separation numbers between Cripps with PeterV minus Cripps without. And red is obviously we've seen a significant decrease. Green is we've seen an increase. And it's really interesting to see that these contested possession rates have really gone up in them terms. Do you know what I mean? And it's become more of a stopping, blocking role. And you've actually seen Bam Bam's numbers increase. So they've actually switched round and they've sacrificed Cripps' kind of dominance for Cripps' ability to give that extra space. Because we know last video how important it is stopping people getting to that behind the ball area on Voss's system.
Yeah, exactly right. And we saw Geelong, I think, expose that on multiple occasions on Saturday night. And I think the beauty about that too, Pom, is that, you know, we've identified it and it's very easily fixable, whether you do that with personnel or you tinker with the way you set up around stoppage too. You know, there are multiple ways with which you can sort that out. But it's interesting too, like with Cripps as well, like, and this is my big thing as well. When you have like injuries, especially PeterV, and you saw in the reserves, like just his ability to get the body in the way of opposition midfielders when the tap does come down, like he just creates acres of space. And, you know, we saw Dow and Fogarty and whatnot operate in those areas as well in the VFL on the weekend in that win against Geelong. And I think that's all. A lot of that is down to PeterV and his ability, as you said, to be able to put those blocks on and get his body in the way to provide space for the midfielders too. And, you know, I think Cripps sort of, I reckon he'd be eagerly awaiting at the bit to get the big man back into, so, you know, he can go back into the role that we saw in the first 6 rounds when we looked so dominant around stoppage too, with PeterV in there as well. So, look, I think Cripps has taken one for the team, obviously, with regards to the role that he's playing for the team. But at the same time, I think we've done a great job I know I always use the saying, but we've done a great job in mitigating the damage, really, with all these injuries. And we've kept ourselves, and we've set, and I keep saying it too, we've set ourselves a foundation with which to win games of football based on our, you know, the way we set up at the source and the stoppage too. So kudos to Voss for recognising what's happened in that regard. And we've been able to put ourselves in a fantastic situation towards the back end of the year. And we get PeterV back, probably won't be this week, obviously. He's not been named, but we'll get him back next week by the looks of it.
Yeah, and I think what you said there about mitigating the damage, you've got to remember as well, since PeterV was kind of like the catalyst for everyone at Carlton Football Club dying. Do you know what I mean? It was like it snowballed. And you can see that Cripps' role really is what you just said. It's mitigating. It's really trying to stop players getting an onus and a foothold around centre clearances and stoppage. It's it's a very selfless task. And a lot of people are talking about, oh, he gets held in the contest.
Mm.
The difference between him in the first 6 rounds is Cripps was actively trying to break that hold, where now I think part of it is that decoy run of taking one for the team, like you say, and getting some player away from that contest so the other midfielders can excel, particularly TDK. And that's not his problem. TDK is young and light. Pitternet, it's very easy for him to put his head down. You saw it in the VFL, 3 or 4 efforts. Where TDK, if he has them 3 or 4 efforts, we've seen consistently, he gets badgered out of the way. And that is the strength of TDK being cleaner than Pitternet. Pitternet's stronger and it allows the midfield to do its work. So I think he'll boom when Pitternet's back. I think you'll suddenly see the first 5 rounds return.
Yeah, exactly. And what perfect timing for it as well in the back end of the year for him to come back into the team and hopefully help out his mate in the midfield too. So, look, I think it'll be interesting as well to see, the dynamic with which they try to shift things around when Pitternet does come into the team. And I think it'll be interesting to see what type of role Cripps can play when De Koning is pinch hitting in the ruck when Pitternet does go. I'm really interested to see what happens with that dynamic, because you would assume that TDK would be a lot fresher when he goes into the ruck as well. But I'm intrigued to see how they play it, and especially with Hewitt out now this week, I'm intrigued to see how they go about it, whether Cripps plays that person at the back of the stoppage behind our ruckman, which we've seen that being Hewitt's role, so whether Cripps can play that type of role, I'm not too sure. I'd assume he would be able to, but it'd be nice to see him get back. He's not out of form. He's just playing a completely different role for the team. And I think that's what people have got to understand. They've got to be informed with the type of role that he's trying to play for our footy team at the moment. Granted, he was pretty poor against Geelong, but it's no excuse. But the midfield he was coming up against was, it's an unbelievable midfield. They're just, Guthrie, Selwood, Dangerfield, all those type of blokes are just, they're epic players.
Mate, spot on. And I think it's no surprise as well when you actually look at the drop in numbers as well. It's genuinely around them areas where you usually associate Cripps being strong at. Like the tackle one is really interesting because his role isn't actively pursuing the ball. It's creating that space and being a nuisance off the ball more. We're seeing that's a huge thing. You're seeing he's a lot more behind the ball as well. But them numbers are very marginal as well. A lot of them numbers, you're talking that could flip in a game. So we could do this in 2 weeks when Pitternet's back and just take no Pitternet and add that game with Pitternet. And I'd suspect a lot of these will jump to the yellow again.
Yeah, exactly right. I think the one thing that I really noticed in these numbers was his uncontested possession count getting right down as well, because I think what Pitternet allows Cripps to do is be able to burst through stoppage, because Pitternet's creating that space as well. And, to bring it back to what Pitternet does and the space he does create around the stoppage with his blocking work, you would probably see that number get up and about too. And we did see Cripps burst out of stoppage early on in the year too, which is what, I think, especially in the Bulldogs game as well, where he was sort of charging his way through opposition as well. And I think that's a number that he's going to start to get up and about it. And that's when he's hurting opposition too. Granted, his contested possession and contested game is what he prides himself on, obviously, but that facet of the game as well is when he's also at his most dangerous. So I would keep an eye out on that particular number there, Pommy, him getting out into space and utilising, maybe handball change as well, being the second last person to use the ball when we release by kick, or even being the person who does take that kick inside forward 50, or could be a shot on goal too on the run.
Mate, spot on. And you've only got to go back to the first 2 rounds with Cripps, where he had 5 goals.
Yeah,
and
huge.
2 of them goals were that move we talked about last week, get it out the back. But then Hewitt's taken an almighty handball straight over the contest. And Cripps has found himself in space, where now you're seeing, even when the ball's won, Cripps is staying very close to his ruckman, where he had a bit more of a license to roam. And I want to think about someone like Marcus Bontempelli as the example. You see Bont do this quite a lot around stoppage. Ball's won. Okay, it's over there. I'm going to enact now. I'm going to start being part of the key cog. And that's where Bont plays his best football, which I think is very similar to Cripps. And we saw a side of Cripps we didn't really see at the start of the year because of that structure.
Yeah, exactly. And as you said, and to rewind on what we said back earlier as well, you look at the bodies that he's been able to, or the bodies that Voss has been able to put through that midfield, and that's helped fuel his game on the outside as well. But I think there's also I don't know, there's a school of thought as well that he's only just a contested bull, if that makes sense, that his outside game is not, not his strength. But I would vouch to say that what we've seen of him this year is that his finishing skills have been, I mean, I'd have to look at the numbers again, but I'd say that, this year he's been finishing his work far better than what we've seen in previous years. And that's testament to what they've been able to implement with his game style too. And it's come as no coincidence that the team is actually starting to win games and flourishing on the scoreboard now. So, it's amazing how when you start playing these selfless roles, that everything starts to come together, doesn't it?
Mate, Spawn, and I always harp on about someone like Trent Cotchin, because if you ever speak to any Collingwood and Richmond fans, they'll tell you that, oh, you know what, we actually think he's brilliant in the terms of we think he's got better. When they won the flag, where the media were like, oh, well, he was having 29 touches. He's now having 19. He's now having 20. Oh, what's happened to Trent Cotchin? It's that understanding of the role and the team thing.
Cool.
And Cripps is generally now looking to give the ball to someone else. But at the start of the season, he was in a wonderful position where the structure and the personnel was of such that Cripps didn't have to do this role. This role you're seeing now is 2018 Cripper in a shit side.
Yeah,
where he had to go on his own. So he would win the ball back, and instead of feeding it out the back, he'd take off, and he's got that ability. But the problem is that's unsustainable. This is sustainable.
I think you also got to look as well, and I think this is a big bugbear of ours as well, is that people tend to overrate disposal count, if that makes sense. Yeah. So I think, and to highlight what Vossi said over the last sort of 2 months, that he's actually been playing really, really good football. But you look at his disposal count, as we can see here, is down 5.1 based on when Pitnet was in the team. And he hasn't been able to hit the scoreboard as well. But that doesn't mean that he's not doing what's required of him as well. So, look, I think last week was a little bit of a downer too, but he's shown ample qualities this year that he's been able to lift the boys up when he needs to. And I've no doubt, I have absolutely no doubt that when Pitnet comes into the team, this guy is just going to be, I mean, it's a bit of a prediction too, but finals is just made for a guy like him, really. We win our next couple, obviously, finals is pretty much all but locked away. And I just can't wait to see. Do you feel like there's a sense of timing with him? I know we don't like to look at the narrative as such and all that. We like to look at our numbers and we like to back our things up with facts. But I feel like there is a sense of timing with what's happened with Cripper, that he's sort of facilitated this role that he's had to. And he hasn't really been battered and bruised in it, though, if that makes sense.
Mate, I'm with you. I'm with you. I think, you look as well, back to your argument, the uncontested possessions and the disposals mirror up, which is a big scream, 5.1, that he's not being allowed to get free. And that's a structural thing. But I'll get sentimental with you. I think Cripper has been there in the worst and darkest times. And I can see, and I've said it at the start of the season, I think Cripper is that Dustin Martin in a final. I reckon that, and that's my argument with this. No Richmond fan goes, 2017 Martin in finals, best player I've ever seen. Why is he not doing that now? I can see Cripper suddenly rising, seeing them first 3 rounds this year, and there'll be child's play in a final, because I reckon this guy has been longing to lead a team out in a final.
Yeah, and I think too, when you look back at that Geelong game, I think you see with a lot of those finals as well, in the finals type atmosphere, space is of the essence, and it can become a real contested slog. Neither team's giving an inch. But I think that with Pitnet coming into the side, Cripps won't be, well, as far as we know, Cripps won't have to play the role that he's had to play in the last couple of weeks. So I think with a more contested nature that we do see in finals every now and again with these games, I think him knowing that he's got PeterV there and then he's also got Hewitt and others around him where he can release the shackles and play that type of contested brand, that's when we're going to see him at his best as well, if that makes sense. Whereas you look at a game like the Geelong game, those contested areas that we were sort of getting beaten around in, I think that he wasn't able to play the role that we've seen earlier in the year because of the personnel, obviously. But I think if that type of contested game was to come up again and PeterV was actually in the side, I think we'd see a much better version of Paddy Cripps, the earlier version that we saw this year that thrives off the contest and is able to burst out of contest as well and hurt other teams going into attack.
Mate, I couldn't agree more. And I think you take the game last week, it was one of his lowest centre bounce attendances, but his actual highest around stoppages. He played a lot behind the ball, which we haven't seen of Cripps. Now, that's probably a structural thing. You look at the personnel the players missing. Obviously, they were trying to react to that dominance. But I agree with you. I think when the personnel is right and the situations are right for Carlton, getting him free in and around the ball is an element when you combine Cerra and Walsh. That is a very deadly combination for the opposition. And when everything's fit and firing, that is the preferred, basically, attacking formation that Voss plays.
Yeah, exactly right. And we saw how dominant it was earlier in the year against, arguably you would say two of the better midfields in the comp. Well, leading into the season, it was Richmond and the Western Bulldogs. And then we went 3-0 against Hawthorn too. But we saw the reliance on him earlier in the year when we lost that Gold Coast game when him and PeterV came out, and we saw the stoppage just completely broke down around there and how important those players are around that stoppage. And you can't, it's almost impossible to change that in game and make sure it actually works. We've seen that gradually improve as the season has gone on as well. And we've been able to almost put the stopgap on it too, which has been great to see. And now we can just get into finals and hit the back season of the year with a bit of momentum. So I would implore everybody just to, if they can, just go back and watch the VFL game. As much as this is about Cripps, it's also about PeterV. Just go back and watch his highlights if you can, and just watch the work he does around the ruck contest and how he facilitates his midfield. It's I mean, arguably you'd say he's one of the best in the league at doing it. One of the best.
Well, I mean, he was second best ranked ruckman in the league before he died. And
Exactly.
what is interesting is Gorn and Grundy have been so down. The AFL is looking for that next ruckman, and big call. But Jared Witts is maybe one of the shoo-ins to be All-Australian this year, given his sustainability. I would hazard a guess that PeterV would be very close to that mantle had he not got injured. And you've only got to look at that VFL. Setterfield played 90% on the wing, and he played that Walsh role of going out the back. Again, a role that PeterV facilitates so well by stopping people getting to him. And you saw last week was an anomaly for Cripps. A lot of time in that defensive wing role we saw floating off the ball. That's why he had 78% on the ball. Very unusual. We've never seen Cripps there. He was used quite a lot as that exit kick out of D50. That is really a structural breakdown and a reaction in game. And I predict that Cripps, once PeterV's back like you, he's going to feast like Dow did and like Setterfield did on that wonderful work that PeterV does off the ball. That is really the most selfless role in footy.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think you made mention of that half-back area that Cripps was in. I think there was no other perfect example of him playing that role last week than when he gathered that ball across half-back and blazed away to Will Hayes in a 3-on-1. And I just say, mate, what is Cripps doing there? That's not exactly where he's supposed to be. He's supposed to be feeding the ball out to the ball users and then running on. So, we're going to see a big change in role when Pitt does come back in. And as you said, those numbers, you look in the red, I'll be really intrigued to see and compare those to what happens when Pitt does come back in the team. So it looks like you and I are going to be doing another video, I think, in the next,
I was
next 2 weeks.
The preview of the finals, we'll do this again and show from then to pro Peternet, and no doubt we'll be able to say it's all good. So to answer the question, then, nothing to worry about. It's just literally a change of role, the captain being a captain and sacrificing his fame for the betterment of the team.
Yeah, exactly right. So to answer the question, what's eating Patrick Cripps? Nothing's eating him at the moment. He just needs to be fed by that big Northern Italian down in the VFL who's probably going to come back in the team next week.
That's it. He's looking for his half combination of Perlo and the Adams family butler, isn't he? That's all he wants back.
Exactly. So no, judge him based on when Peternet comes back into the team, not what he's done in the last 2 months. But I mean, you can judge him based on what he's done in the last 2 months because it's been a selfless role for the club.
Mate, spot on. Well, thank you very much for joining me, Paolo, as always. Make sure you check the Jumper Punch out, the Jumper Punch boys, and check Paolo's racing tips. They're the best in the land, evidently.
They're ticking along very nicely at the moment, Pommy. So, get on it. tips.betdeluxe.com.au to check out all my handiwork at PaulSeb05 is my Twitter feed, and then Jumper Punch as well, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, all that. And we have a special guest on the Jumper Punch this weekend. I'm not going to say who it is, but I reckon you might know him.
I've heard he's very good looking, quite intelligent as well.
Yeah, maybe put a caveat on the good looking, but yeah, we'll go on.
Modest as well, I've heard. Really modest, a real modest guy.
Correct.
But thank you very much, Paolo. Thank you everyone for watching, and go Blues.
Go Blues.